The morning Corinne Whitmore decided to drain her pool was the same morning her therapist suggested she was holding on to resentment in unhealthy ways. Dr. Parsons had actually used the word vindictive, though she'd softened it with clinical language about displaced frustration and neighborhood tensions. But Corinne understood. Dr. Parsons thought she was a bitch. Everyone did. The pool had been pristine 3 weeks ago, a crystalline rectangle of chlorinated perfection that had cost her $40,000 to install. Marcus had hated it. Too gaudy, he'd said before the separation papers were signed. Too much like you, all surface, nothing real underneath. Corinne had smiled then, right-lipped, and ordered the contractors to expand it by another foot just to prove she could make unilateral decisions now. The boy next door had started climbing the fence 2 weeks after that. His name was Tyler Chen, 13 years old, and he lived in the rambling Victorian house with the peeling paint and overgrown garden. His mother worked nights at the hospital. His father was somewhere in Shanghai on business, and Tyler had apparently decided that the Whitmore pool was a sufficient substitute for parental supervision. He'd show up around 4 p.m. most days, scaling the 6-foot privacy fence with the kind of athletic grace that made Corinne's jaw tighten. He'd splash around for an hour, sometimes bringing his golden retriever, a 3-year-old tank of a dog named Henry, and letting the animal paddle in the shallow end while rock music leaked from his phone speaker. Corinne had called him over exactly once. "My pool has very specific chemical ratios," she'd said, standing by the gate in her white linen pants. "The dog is disrupting the balance. Also, you're trespassing." Tyler had looked at her with the kind of unguarded kindness that made her want to slap him. "Sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Henry really loves the water. Our house doesn't have one, and the community pool is closed for repairs. Would it be okay if we came by on weekends? I could help you with maintenance or something." She'd said no. Then she'd called the HOA about the Victorian house's garden, which was creating a negative aesthetic environment for the neighborhood. They'd sent a warning. She'd called again 2 weeks later about the fence, claiming it was improperly maintained. They'd sent another warning. She'd even filed a complaint about noise levels. Tyler's music, her report said, was disturbing the peaceful enjoyment of her property. The HOA had been irritatingly sympathetic to Tyler's family. The head of the committee, Gerald Finch, had actually come to her door to discuss proportional responses to minor violations, and had suggested that a young boy's occasional use of nearby amenities is hardly a crisis. Corinne had smiled at him very sweetly and asked if Gerald had read the covenant about maintaining community standards. She'd quoted the exact subsection. That night, she'd called a contractor and gotten a price for draining the pool completely, $3,500. She'd paid in full and scheduled it for Saturday morning. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even really about Tyler, though he was certainly part of it. It was about the principle. It was about having something that was hers, her taste, her investment, her choice, and watching other people want it, and then taking it away so they couldn't have it. There was a specific satisfaction in that equation, the kind that made her feel alive in a way that actually living with Marcus never had. Saturday morning came bright and cold. Corinne stood on her back patio in yoga wear watching the contractor attach the pump to the drain valve. The water was so blue, so perfect. By noon, it would be empty. By next week, it would be filled with concrete. She'd have a tennis court instead, or maybe nothing at all. She liked the idea of nothing, of an empty rectangle of dark paving, a monument to her solitude and her right to spend her money however she wanted to. The contractor, a broad-shouldered man named Dennis, was checking his gauges when Tyler appeared at the fence. "Mrs. Whitmore," his voice carried that same unsettling politeness. "Is everything okay? Why are you draining it?" Corinne didn't look at him. "It's my pool, Tyler. I can do whatever I want with it. But Henry and I were just coming to ask if we could use it this afternoon. My mom said I could invite a friend, and we were just going to." "The pool is being decommissioned," Corinne said, finally turning to face him. She watched his expression change, confusion blooming into something that might have been hurt. The boy was too sensitive. The world would use that against him someday. "For how long?" Tyler asked. "Permanently." She watched the word land. Dennis turned on the pump. The water began moving toward the drain with a steady, metallic gurgle. Tyler stood at the fence for another moment, and then he turned and walked back toward his house without saying anything else. Corinne felt a flicker of something, not quite satisfaction, but close. Vindication, maybe. or just the simple relief of a problem being solved through her own agency. She went inside and made a latte, put on a podcast about decluttering, and tried not to think about the look on his face. By 2 p.m., the pool was half empty. By 5 p.m., it was three-quarters empty, and the bottom was starting to show through the murky water, pale concrete, a few leaves that had drifted down, the drain grate yawning open. Corinne had gone for a run and come back. The light was just starting to turn golden as evening approached. She stood in the yard, admiring the sense of purpose it gave her, the systematic destruction of something beautiful, the conversion of luxury into nothing. It was almost meditative. She was watching the water level drop when she heard the dog barking. It was panicked, shrill, nothing like Henry's usual deep, lazy bark. Corinne frowned and looked toward the fence. The barking continued, more desperate now, and then she heard Tyler's voice. "Henry, Henry, come back." Without thinking about it consciously, she walked toward the sound. The fence line ran along the border between their properties, thick with flowering shrubs on her side. She pushed through them and stopped. Henry was in her pool. The dog had somehow gotten through or over the fence. Corinne didn't know how, didn't care at that moment, and had jumped into the draining water. But the water wasn't deep enough anymore. The drain was too powerful. The dog was paddling frantically, his golden coat dark and plastered to his body, and he was being pulled toward the metal grate where the suction was strongest. His back legs were already at the drain, and he was fighting against it with everything he had, his nails scratching against the slick concrete, his barks now yelps of pure terror. Tyler was on the other side of the fence, climbing it, his phone somewhere on the ground, his face white. "Henry," the boy was screaming. "Henry, hold on." Corinne didn't move. There was a pump running in the yard, machinery that she'd paid for, processes that were already in motion. The drain would stop if she pressed the button on the control box. She knew that, had been told that specifically by Dennis. But her hands didn't move toward it. It took exactly 4 seconds for her to have that thought and 4 more seconds for her to understand what she was doing, or rather, what she was allowing to happen. And then Tyler was at the fence, throwing his leg over it, dropping down on her side with a hard thud that knocked the wind out of him. He was running now, his shoes skidding on the wet concrete. Corinne finally moved. She walked to the control box. She pressed the button. The pump whined and powered down. But it was too late to matter, or it would have been. Tyler was already in the pool. He was jumping into water that was barely over 3 feet deep, hitting the bottom hard, scrambling toward Henry, grabbing the dog around his chest, and yanking him backward with a strength that seemed impossible in a boy so thin. For a second, the dog was stuck. The suction held Henry's back legs, and Tyler was pulling, and the dog was screaming in a way that Corinne had never heard an animal scream before. Not pain, exactly, but the primal sound of something being torn between forces. Then Henry came free. Tyler went down on his back in the shallow, dirty water, Henry thrashing on top of him, coughing and gagging. The boy was holding the dog, telling him it was okay, the dog's eyes rolling back in his head, water draining from his nose and mouth. Corinne stood perfectly still. For a long moment, nothing moved but the water settling, lapping against the concrete walls. Then Tyler looked up at her. His wet hair was plastered to his forehead. His clothes were heavy with pool water and dirt. His chest was heaving, his face streaked with something, tears, chlorine water, or some combination of both. "Call 911, he said. His voice was shaking. "Please, he's not breathing right. Call 911. Corinne pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her hands were steady. She dialed. She gave the address. She told them it was a dog, that it had nearly drowned, that her pool had a drain problem. The dispatcher kept her on the line. She watched Tyler climb out of the pool with Henry in his arms, the dog convulsing, hacking, his tongue lolling. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Help is coming." Corinne stayed on the line. She watched the boy lay the dog down on the concrete and start pushing on its chest, his thin arms working in a rhythm he'd probably learned from some YouTube video or health class. The dog coughed. Water came out. The dog's eyes moved. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later. The paramedics took one look at the situation. The empty pool, the drain, the boy soaking wet, the dog barely conscious. And one of them, a woman with kind eyes and a clipped professional manner, bent down to examine Henry. "He aspirated water," she said to her partner. "Need to get him to emergency vet stat." Tyler looked at Corinne. Can we use your phone to call my mom? My phone got wet and we need to tell her where we're going and—" He was still gasping, still in shock. Corinne handed him her phone. She watched him dial. She heard him say, "Mom, it was an accident. No, I'm fine. Henry almost drowned and Mrs. Whitmore." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude, not yet, but something complex and confused. "Mrs. Whitmore called the ambulance. We're going to the vet's. I don't know yet. The paramedics are putting him in a carrier." His mother arrived 20 minutes later, still in her hospital scrubs, her face a study in barely contained panic. She looked at the pool. She looked at the paramedics. She looked at Tyler, soaking wet and shivering despite the evening still being warm. She looked at Corinne. "Thank you," she said, but it came out as a question. There was a complex gratitude in it, yes, but also something else. A mother recognizing that her child had been in true danger and had survived it. They took Henry to the emergency veterinary hospital. Corinne watched them drive away. She stood in her yard as the evening turned to night, the drained pool behind her a dark cavity in the ground, and she thought about how thin the line was between one decision and another, between pressing a button and not pressing it, between having a story where she was the woman who drained the pool and having a story where she was the woman who saved a dog's life. Except she hadn't done either, really. Tyler had done both. She picked up her phone and called Dennis. "Don't fill the concrete," she said. "I changed my mind. Fill the pool back up tomorrow morning." "You sure?" Dennis sounded confused. "That's going to cost another $2,000. Pump fees, water, chemicals." "I'm sure." She hung up before he could ask why. She didn't have a good answer anyway. That night, Corinne lay in bed and scrolled through her phone. She found the neighborhood Facebook group and read the posts. Someone named Sarah Chen had posted at 6:47 p.m. "Tyler saved my dog's life today. He's the bravest kid I know. Thank you, thank you, thank you to the paramedics, and thank you to Corinne Whitmore for calling them." There were 47 comments. Most of them were about Tyler being a hero. Several were about Corinne, and they were more complicated. "I heard she drained the pool on purpose," someone had written. "Like she was trying to get rid of the dog." Another comment, "That's not what I heard. I heard she shut off the drain immediately and probably saved Henry's life." A third, from Gerald Finch himself. "All that matters is that the boy acted with courage and the dog is alive. Let's focus on that." Corinne turned off her phone. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about how quickly a person could become a villain in other people's stories. How easy it was. How one decision, one moment of callousness or indifference could define everything else about you in people's minds. And how strange it was that in being forced to choose, forced by the simple accident of a dog getting into her yard, she had chosen to press the button. She hadn't done it for Tyler. She hadn't done it to be a hero. She'd done it because in the moment when she had to act, some part of her that she thought was dead or absent or fundamentally broken had actually woken up. And now everyone would have a different story. Now she would be the woman who called the ambulance, the woman who mattered in the end. She wasn't sure which version of herself she preferred. The emergency vet kept him overnight for observation, cleared his lungs Sunday morning, and sent him home on antibiotics with a recommended 3-week recovery period. According to the Post, Sarah Chen made Monday morning, which Corinne read over her coffee before she'd even gotten out of bed. Henry was resting comfortably and eating like his old self. Corinne stared at the photo. Tyler's mom holding the dog's tongue out in a pant. Tyler's arm around both of them, his smile wide and genuine, and in some way that Corinne couldn't quite articulate, forgiving. She had water delivery scheduled for that same Monday morning. Dennis arrived at 8 o'clock with the filled truck, and they set about revering the drainage process. Watching the pool refill was somehow more disturbing than watching it empty. The empty space became less existential and more just wrong, a hole in her landscape, a negative space that insisted on being filled. By Tuesday, the pool was full again. By Wednesday, the water was balanced and clear and blue. Corinne went back to her routine. Morning yoga, coffee at the same cafe where she always went, her Tuesday and Thursday therapy appointments with Dr. Parsons, who noticed immediately that something was different. "You're holding yourself differently," Dr. Parsons said. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of penetrating gaze that Corinne usually found deeply irritating. "Less defensive, more, I want to say, deflated. Is that accurate?" "Someone's dog almost drowned in my pool," Corinne said. "I had to call an ambulance." Dr. Parsons waited. She was very good at waiting. "I was draining the pool," Corinne continued. The dog got in somehow, and the suction from the drain nearly killed it. The boy, Tyler, the neighbor boy I've mentioned, he dove in and got the dog out. Then he got into my car soaking wet and bleeding from his shin bone, and I realized I was letting him take Henry to the vet alone, so I drove them myself. This last part wasn't entirely true. Karen had stood in her driveway for a solid minute before getting in her car, but she had gotten in it. "How did you feel?" Dr. Parsons asked. Karen thought about this. Complicit, at first, then I don't know, like I'd stepped back from something, made a different choice. "Do you think you would have made the same choice if the boy hadn't gotten in the pool?" "I think I would have watched the dog die," Karen said. "Yes." Dr. Parsons wrote something down. Karen hated when she did that, the presumption that there was something worth recording about Karen's moral failure. "Tell me about your intention with the pool," Dr. Parsons said. "Before the incident, what were you hoping to accomplish?" "I wanted to take something away from him," Karen said. She was being honest now, or honest enough. "I wanted him to stop coming to my yard and stop thinking my life was accessible to him. I wanted to prove that I had the right to destroy something just because I owned it." "And how does that align with your stated goals in therapy? Your desire to feel less isolated, to rebuild community connections after the separation?" Karen didn't answer. She didn't need to. The contradiction was obvious. She was the kind of woman who drained pools to punish children. She was the kind of woman who had stood and watched a dog struggle for breath without moving. She was the kind of woman that Marcus had been right to leave. But she was also, apparently, the kind of woman who could get in a car and drive to the emergency vet. So what did that make her? "I think," Dr. Parsons said, "that you're being confronted with a version of yourself that you didn't expect to encounter, and it's uncomfortable. People rarely like discovering they have more capacity for kindness or cruelty than they believe they do." On Thursday, Karen ran into Sarah Chen at the grocery store. Tyler's mother was in the produce section, selecting apples, and she looked up at the same moment Karen was looking. For a second, they were just two women in a supermarket, no history between them. Then Sarah smiled. "Karen, I've been hopping to see you. I wanted to thank you properly in person. What you did for Henry, for Tyler, you didn't have to make that choice, but you did." Karen set down her basket. She felt something crack open in her chest, like ice breaking under pressure. "I was draining the pool on purpose," she said quietly. "I was doing it to keep your son away from my yard." Sarah's expression didn't change. She just stood there holding her apples, and then she said, "I know. Gerald told me about the HOA complaints and the fence. I know you were angry with us for existing next to you." "I wanted to make him stop wanting things he couldn't have," Karen said. She was being brutally honest now, and she wasn't sure why. Maybe because lies required energy she no longer had. "I wanted him to understand that some things weren't for him." "And then the dog got in anyway," Sarah said. "And your son." "He's not my son. He's nobody's son but yours." "Saved him anyway," Sarah finished. "Despite everything, despite your pool being empty on purpose, despite you being angry at him, he still dove in. He still did the thing that mattered." Karen couldn't speak. "I'm going to say something," Sarah continued, "and I want you to really hear it. My Tyler doesn't hate you. He doesn't even think badly of you. He thinks you're sad. He thinks you're someone who lost something important and got stuck in the loss. He thinks you're probably a good person who's having a hard time." "He's wrong," Karen said. "Maybe, or maybe he's right, and you're just not ready to believe him yet." Sarah reached out and touched Karen's arm briefly, just for a moment, the way you might touch someone who is balancing on an uncertain edge. Then she moved past her in the aisle, back to her shopping, back to her life. Karen stood in the produce section and felt something shift. It wasn't healing, exactly, and it wasn't forgiveness. She wasn't sure she was capable of forgiving herself, and she knew that 17-year-old girls and her therapist weren't enough witnesses to make that happen. But it was a crack in the wall, a small opening where a different kind of light could get in. She finished her shopping. She went home. She looked at her pool, which was now clean and full and useless to her, since she was never going to use it now that she knew what it felt like to possess something beautiful and want to destroy it. That weekend, she found a pamphlet on her door. It was from the neighborhood community center, advertising their Saturday morning volunteer program. Kitchen prep, dog walking at the shelter, reading tutoring for elementary school kids. The flyer was slightly crinkled, like it had been handled by nervous fingers. On the back in teenage boy handwriting, You're good at organizing things. Maybe this could help. Tyler. Karen stood on her porch, reading this note, and realized something. Tyler Chen was letting her off the hook. He was giving her permission to be something other than the woman who drained the pool. He was offering her a narrative where she could be the kind of person who helped, who mattered, who was part of something larger than her own resentment. She didn't know if she deserved that permission. But maybe, she thought, that didn't matter. Maybe the point was whether she was brave enough to accept it anyway. Karen became a fixture at the community center's Saturday morning shift. She organized the food donation boxes with a kind of ruthless efficiency that made everyone else's attempts at tidiness look like abstract art. She created a system. She created subcategories. She created a spreadsheet. The director, a woman named Michelle who had the exhausted patience of someone who worked with the public for a living, had actually hugged her after 3 weeks. "You've made our lives so much easier," Michelle had said. It was a small thing, but it was also the first time in years that anyone had expressed gratitude toward Karen without it being transactional or obligatory, and that mattered. Tyler still came to visit the pool on warm days. Sarah had asked, formally over email, respecting the boundaries of their newly complicated relationship, if it would be okay. Karen had written back, "It was never not okay. I just needed to learn that." What Karen didn't expect was that Tyler would bring his friends. A rotating cast of neighborhood kids, mostly Tyler's age, mostly Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean, mostly kids whose parents worked long hours and appreciated that there was an adult woman who would occasionally order pizza. Let them use the outdoor sound system, and ask them about their lives without the exhausting performance of forced interest. "My college advisor says I need to show community involvement," Tyler mentioned one day in July, floating on an inflatable raft. "I was thinking about mentioning the volunteer thing at the center. Do you think I could include that?" "You don't volunteer at the center," Karen said. "I know, but I could, if you wanted help." Karen was sitting in a lounge chair, reading a novel for pleasure for the first time in approximately 15 years. She looked at him over her book. The boy was nearly 14 now, taller than he'd been in spring, his shoulders broader, his face losing some of its softness. He'd been through something that day in May, been through the pure terror of almost watching a living thing die, and it had marked him, but not in a way that had broken him. In a way that had clarified him, maybe. "Yes," Karen said, "I want your help." Tyler grinned, and there was something so uncomplicated about it, so genuinely pleased that Karen had to look back at her book so he wouldn't see her eyes getting wet. But things were changing in ways Karen wasn't entirely prepared for. In August, Marcus called. Karen hadn't heard from her ex-husband in almost 8 months, and his voice on the phone sounded thinner than she remembered, more tentative. "I heard you've become a pillar of the community," he said. Not hostile, but not warm either. Something in between, like neutral and sorry, were occupying the same emotional real estate. "I volunteer," Karen said. "Nothing dramatic." "That's not what I heard. I heard you're helping kids, that the neighborhood thinks you're some kind of saint now." Karen didn't like the way he said that. There was judgment in it, which was rich coming from a man who'd spent their marriage judging her for not being enough of something and too much of something else. "People change," she said. "Do they? I don't think they do. I think they just get better at managing their worst selves." "Is that why you called? To tell me you don't believe in transformation?" A pause. "I called because I'm getting remarried. Her name is Jennifer. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it through the grapevine. She's a good woman, calmer than, well, calmer. Calmer than Karen, that's what he meant. Karen felt something like a flash of the old pain, the old anger, the specific burn of knowing that Marcus had decided she wasn't worth it, that some other woman was better suited to the life he wanted to live. But underneath that pain was something else now, something that felt like acceptance or maybe just exhaustion from carrying the weight of his judgment. "I hope you're happy with her," Karen said, and she meant it, which was maybe the most shocking part of this entire transformation. "You really changed," Marcus said. He sounded confused, like this wasn't in his script. "Someone's dog almost drowned in my pool," Karen said, "and a kid I didn't even like dove in and saved it, and I realized that I'd been spending a lot of energy being angry at people for just living near me, existing. I was angry that they wanted things I had, and I realized how tired I was, how tired it made me to be that person." "That's very Dr. Parsons," Marcus said, but his tone was softer. "Yeah, well, she's worth the copy." After he hung up, Karen did something she'd been avoiding. She went to her computer and searched for her own name in the neighborhood Facebook group. The thread from May was still there, buried now under months of newer posts. But the photos were still up. Tyler holding Henry in the shallow end of the pool, Tyler's arm around his mother. And then, deeper in the thread, a comment from Sarah Chen dated a week after the incident. Thank you all for the outpouring of support for Henry and Tyler. I also want to acknowledge Karen Whitmore. I won't pretend our relationship was easy before what happened. But in the moment when it mattered, she made the right choice. I think that's worth something. I think that's worth recognizing. The comment had 43 likes. Most of the responses were kind, though there were a few that Karen recognized as defensive of Tyler, making sure everyone understood that he was the real hero here, which he was. But there was something in Sarah's acknowledgement that felt like grace, a refusal to tell a story where Karen remained the villain, a willingness to complicate the narrative. In September, the community center asked Karen to officially join the board. Michelle presented the offer over lunch, during one of their regular meetings to discuss programming and needs. We'd like to have someone who understands organization, Michelle said. Someone who can help us scale up. The volunteer program you've been running has doubled in size. Everyone wants to work the Saturday shifts. Parents are asking if there's a way to make it ongoing. Karen had started crying in the middle of a sandwich, which was unprofessional and embarrassing, and apparently something she did now. Allowed herself to be overwhelmed by genuine emotion instead of swallowing it down and converting it into resentment. I'm not a good person, Karen told Michelle. I need to be clear about that before you give me any kind of official role. Neither am I, Michelle said, but I think I've been getting better at it, and I think you have been too. October brought homecoming at Tyler's school. Sarah mentioned it when Karen ran into her at the farmer's market, and Karen found herself doing something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She asked to come. Not as a family member, but as a neighbor. As someone who wanted to see the boy who had saved a dog get to be a regular teenager at a regular football game. Sarah bought her a ticket. Karen stood in the bleachers next to Sarah and Tyler's father, who'd flown in from Shanghai for the occasion, and watched her neighbor's son at the football game with his friends, his face painted in the school colors, his voice hoarse from cheering. He waved at them at halftime, and the wave was casual and normal and unmarked by any special significance. Just a kid waving at people he knew. That was the transformation, Karen realized. Not being marked as someone who had changed, but being allowed to just be a regular person in the background of someone else's life. Not the hero, not the villain, just someone there. And then at the end of the third quarter, Tyler made a tackle. It was a solid hit, nothing that would make ESPN, but the crowd went wild, and Sarah jumped up and screamed, and Tyler's father put his arm around Karen's shoulder and said, "That's my boy," and Karen found herself yelling too, losing her voice along with everyone else, part of something collective and simple. Afterward, Tyler came over to them, his uniform dirty, his helmet hair matted down, his face flushed with exertion and joy. "Did you see that?" he asked. "We saw it," Sarah said. "We all saw it." Tyler looked at Karen. There was something in his eyes that had become more complex over the past months. Not quite friendship, but something beyond simple neighbor kindness. An understanding, maybe. A recognition that they'd both been part of something important that went beyond the single incident that had marked them. "Thanks for coming," Tyler said to Karen. "Thanks for inviting me," Karen replied. It was true, he had invited her in a way that mattered. He'd accepted her transformation, if that's what this was, without asking her to prove it or explain it or do anything other than show up. November arrived with the kind of dry heat that still felt like summer pretending to be fall. Halloween passed. Karen found herself ordering pizza for Tyler's trick-or-treating group. A dozen kids in various stages of costume creativity passing through her house like it was a normal social hub, instead of the fortress of solitude it had been just 18 months ago. Thanksgiving was coming, and Sarah had asked if Karen wanted to join their family dinner. Karen had said yes before Sarah had even finished asking the question, which was either very good judgment or very bad judgment. She wasn't sure which. But a week before Thanksgiving, something shifted. Karen was at the community center on a Saturday, helping Michelle reorganize the donated items in the pantry, when Tyler came in earlier than usual. He was with Henry, who was now fully recovered from his near-drowning experience and had become something of a mascot for the center. Kids loved him. He was gentle and enormous and had the patience of a saint. "I need to ask you something," Tyler said. He sounded nervous, which was unusual. Tyler had become noticeably less nervous over the months. "Okay," Karen said. She was still holding a can of tomatoes standing on a step stool. "Henry's been having some issues, behavioral stuff. The vet says it might be trauma from the drowning, like PTSD. She recommended we work with a trainer, but the trainers in our area are expensive, and—" he trailed off. Karen waited. She'd gotten better at waiting. "There's a trainer who's really well-regarded, works with rescue dogs and dogs with anxiety, but she charges like $1,000 for the initial assessment, and then ongoing training is on top of that. My mom doesn't have that kind of money right now. Dad's business isn't doing well, and—" Tyler ran his hand through his hair. "I was wondering if you might be able to help, not pay for it, or I don't know what I'm asking, actually." Karen got down from the step stool. She set the tomatoes on the shelf with deliberate care. "Your mother didn't put you up to this?" she asked. "No, she'd be mad if she knew I was asking. She thinks we're managing fine on our own." "But you're not. Henry's peeing in the house again. He's having nightmares, like actual nightmares where he wakes up screaming, and he's scared of the pool. We had to drain it, actually, because he wouldn't come near the yard anymore and it was upsetting him. Mom said we might have to rehome him if he can't get better." Karen felt something hit her in the chest. The image of Henry being given away, disappearing into someone else's life, because of something that had happened in her pool, that Karen had allowed to happen in her pool, was suddenly intolerable. "Tell me the trainer's name," Karen said. "Mrs. Whitmore, I can't ask." "You didn't ask, I'm offering." Tyler's face did something complicated. Relief, gratitude, but also something that looked a little like conflict. "My mom is going to know where the money came from. She's going to feel like she owes you something." "Then she'll know," Karen said. "That's between you two, but I will not have Henry rehomed because of something that happened in my yard." She didn't say because of something I allowed to happen. She didn't need to, Tyler knew. It turned out the trainer's name was Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, and she ran a practice specializing in traumatized and anxious dogs. Karen looked her up that afternoon and called immediately. They scheduled an assessment for the following Saturday. What Karen didn't anticipate was that Sarah would call her that evening. "Tyler told me," Sarah said, no preamble. She sounded angry, not furious, but definitely angry in a controlled, careful way. "I know," Karen said. "I don't need your money, Karen." "I know that too." "Then why are you offering it?" Karen thought about this question. She thought about it very carefully because the answer mattered, and she wanted to be honest in a way that had meaning. "Because Henry almost died in my pool," Karen said. "Because I drained it on purpose. Because I was angry at your son for wanting something I had, and I decided to take it away from him. And because the consequence of that, one of the consequences, is a traumatized dog that might get rehomed because your family can't afford specialized care. And because I can afford that care. And because your son came and asked me instead of asking his mother, which means he knows, at 13 years old, that sometimes the person who caused the problem is the person who can help fix it. And I'm not going to let him be wrong about that." There was a very long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry," Karen continued, because the silence felt like it needed more. "I'm sorry for being the kind of person who drains pools to hurt kids. I'm sorry that you and Tyler have had to adjust to me being around. I'm sorry that I'm always going to be the woman who did that. But I'm also not sorry because I can't change it, and I'm doing what I can to change myself. And helping with Henry's trainer is part of that." Sarah was quiet for another moment. Then, "She's going to want to work with Henry in our yard at the pool location." "Okay," Karen said. "And she's probably going to suggest that Henry needs positive water exposure to get over the trauma." "I figured," Karen said. "So you're going to have to refill the pool." Karen hadn't thought about that. The pool had been empty since May. The concrete was cracking slightly in places, and it had taken on the appearance of an abandoned monument to poor decision-making. But the thought of refilling it, of making it beautiful again, accessible again, for a dog that had almost died in it, felt like the kind of irony or completion or narrative symmetry that you couldn't write into a story. It had to come from real life to mean anything. "I'll call the contractor tomorrow," Karen said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." After Sarah hung up, Karen sat on her couch in the dark living room and thought about how strange it was that the same object, the pool, could represent so many different things depending on who was telling the story and when. Her indulgence, her cruelty, her redemption, her hope. A tool for punishment, a scene of trauma, a place of healing. The contractor came Monday. The water truck came Tuesday. By Thursday, the pool was full and balanced and ready for a traumatized dog to learn that water wasn't only a place where you almost died. Dr. Okonkwo arrived Saturday morning with her assessment clipboard and her calm, professional demeanor. She was a black woman in her 50s with gray threading through her braids and the kind of presence that made you want to do what she said before she even asked. Henry's case is actually fairly common, she explained to Sarah and Karen as they watched Henry from the sunroom, the dog sniffing around the empty deck area, clearly anxious but trying very hard to be brave. Traumatic water exposure at a young age, successful intervention by a person he trusts. He associates the pool with both terror and salvation. We need to decouple those associations. Rewire his brain so the pool becomes just a pool again, not a trauma site. "Can you do that?" Sarah asked. She sounded hopeful and skeptical in equal measure. "I can, yes. It's going to take time. Probably 6 to 8 weeks of twice-weekly sessions. We'll start with very shallow water, very positive reinforcement, and we'll gradually increase depth and complexity. The key is making sure Henry always feels in control." Tyler had come to watch the assessment. He was standing next to Henry, occasionally reaching down to stroke the dog's ears. When Dr. Okonkwo started her initial exercises, just getting Henry to wade into an inch of water, Tyler moved away from the dog deliberately, letting him make his own choice about proximity to the water. Karen watched all of this from the sunroom window. She watched Dr. Okonkwo work with Henry, watched Sarah's face soften as the dog took his first tentative steps into the shallow end, watched Tyler's shoulders relax when Henry didn't panic. And she thought, this is what it means to make amends, not to apologize and have it be accepted, not to do good deeds and have them balance out the scales, but to do the work of undoing damage, knowing it might take years, knowing the damage might never be completely undone, and doing it anyway because it's the right thing and there's no other option that makes sense. Dr. Okonkwo worked with Henry every Saturday and Wednesday for the next 2 months. The pool became a therapeutic space, a place of patient, incremental healing. Henry went from anxious to cautious to, by week 7, almost playful. He started paddling, then swimming, then diving, carefully, Dr. Okonkwo making sure his air intake was safe. And Tyler came every session just to watch, to be present for his dog's healing in a quiet and uncomplicated way. Karen started sitting by the pool during these sessions instead of watching from the window. She didn't interact much with Henry or Dr. Okonkwo or even Tyler usually. She just sat there with a book, being a regular part of the landscape, a normal adult presence in a space that had once been only hers and was now becoming something more complex. Sarah would sometimes bring coffee and sit with her. They'd drink coffee in comfortable silence, watching the dog they'd both been transformed by learn how to swim again. By December, Henry could swim the full length of the pool without panic. More than that, he seemed to enjoy it. He'd come bounding out to the yard with Tyler on Saturday mornings, and before Dr. Okonkwo even had to ask, the dog would pad over to the shallow end and wade in, his tail wagging. "He's passing his own therapeutic tipping point," Dr. Okonkwo explained to Sarah and Karen at the final assessment. "The trauma is still there, I think. That doesn't just disappear, but it's no longer dominating his behavior. He has agency now. He can choose to be in the pool or not, and he's choosing to participate. That's healing." Sarah asked if Dr. Okonkwo thought they should continue sessions into the new year. "I think he could benefit from ongoing work for maintenance," Dr. Okonkwo said. "But I also think what he really needs now is just to be a normal dog again. He needs to play. He needs to be with his boy. He needs to experience the pool as just a pool, which means not having professionals paying close attention to every interaction with it." She said this while looking at Karen, and Karen understood that the statement was layered. Henry needed to be a normal dog, which meant Karen needed to be a normal neighbor, which meant no more special attention, no more complicated gratitude, just ordinary proximity and the kind of love that asks nothing except to be permitted to exist. The last Saturday session ended with Dr. Okonkwo packing up her equipment while Henry paddled laps, actual joyful laps, in the pool. Tyler was sitting on the edge, his feet in the water, watching his dog with the kind of contentment that Karen recognized as belonging to someone who'd been afraid and had made it through to the other side. "Thank you," Tyler said to Karen. He wasn't looking at her directly, just speaking the words into the space between them. "For helping make this happen." "Your dog helped," Karen said. "He's the one who had to do the work." "Yeah, but you paid for it, and you let us use your pool, and you didn't have to do either of those things." "No," Karen agreed. "I didn't have to." "Why did you?" It was a direct question, and Tyler deserved a direct answer. Not the complicated, therapy-processed version, but the real thing. "Because I'm the kind of person who drained this pool to hurt you," Karen said. "And I needed to be the kind of person who could choose to do something different. Henry just gave me a way to actually do that." Tyler finally looked at her. He was almost 14 and a half now, was going to be taller than Karen soon, was starting to grow into his face in a way that suggested the man he'd become. But he still had that quality of fundamental kindness that had drawn him to her yard in the first place, that had made him dive into a shallow pool to save a drowning dog, that made him able to sit with someone who tried to hurt him and just accept her. "For what it's worth," Tyler said, "I think you're a good person." "You're a good liar," Karen said. "I'm a good observer," Tyler corrected. "There's a difference." Thanksgiving had been small, just Karen and Sarah's family in the Chen's kitchen, the house smelling like everything good. Henry lay on a rug in the corner, and no one acted like that was remarkable or special. They just ate and talked and existed in ordinary proximity to each other. Christmas came. Karen hosted a small gathering, Sarah and Tyler's father, who decided to stay through the holidays and was clearly working on some kind of marital reconciliation with Sarah, though no one spoke about it directly. Michelle and her partner came. A few of the regular volunteers from the community center showed up. They drank wine and ate food that Karen had cooked and then obsessively organized afterward, and nobody tried to stop her or make it a joke. New Year's Eve, Karen was alone. She turned down several invitations, mostly because she hadn't quite learned how to be around people without thinking she needed to earn their presence through service or labor. But she'd also learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely anymore. Being alone was just being alone. Sometimes that was fine. She stood by her pool at 11:50 p.m. and thought about where she'd been a year ago. The contractor had been coming. The pump had been running. The boy and the dog had been on the other side of the fence, not knowing that in a matter of hours, their ordinary Saturday would become the event that changed everything. At midnight, she listened to the neighborhood fireworks and raised a glass to herself, not out of pride, but out of recognition. She'd been a different woman then. She was a different woman now. She didn't know yet if that meant she was a good woman, but she knew she was working toward it. That had to count for something. By February, Karen had made it through winter. The pool was still there, still used, still functioning as something that belonged to more people than just her. Tyler and a rotating group of neighborhood kids would still come by on weekends when it was warm enough. Sarah and Karen had developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but was more than acquaintance, a comfortable interdependence that required no performance. Dr. Parsons had suggested that Karen might be approaching a point where therapy could start to wind down. "You've made significant changes," she said in their last appointment of February. "You've integrated yourself into community structures. You've made amends, not perfectly, not completely, but with genuine intention. You've stopped using anger as a primary coping mechanism. You're beginning to develop authentic relationships. These are not small things." "What if I go backwards?" Karen asked. It was a question she'd been afraid to voice for weeks. "What if I start feeling resentful again and I try to hurt people and I just spiral back into who I was?" "Then you'll have developed a skill that every human being needs," Dr. Parsons said. "The ability to recognize when you're making a mistake and correct course. You're learning that you're not bound by your worst impulses, that you have agency. That's the point of all of this." Karen thought about that word, agency, choice, the ability to act in a way that's separate from your impulses. She had agency. When Marcus called in March to say that the wedding was happening in 6 weeks, and he wondered if she'd like to be invited to the rehearsal dinner, though not the wedding because that would be weird, Karen said yes without hesitation. When Jennifer called her 2 days later, which was mortifying and weird but also unexpectedly kind, Karen invited her to coffee. They met at the same cafe Karen had been going to for years, and Jennifer turned out to be a calm, competent woman who read books about organizational psychology and asked Karen genuine questions about her life. Marcus said you used to be really focused on perfection, Jennifer said, that you couldn't let go of things. I still am, Karen said. Still can't let go, but I'm learning to let go of different things, grudges instead of standards, maybe. Jennifer smiled. She had a kind smile, nothing like Karen's thin-lipped arrangement of facial muscles. I think that's probably healthy. In April, Tyler turned 14. He invited Karen to his birthday dinner at a Japanese restaurant, just family and close people. Karen sat between Sarah and Tyler's father, and she listened to stories about Tyler's childhood. And when it came time for cake, she sang along with everyone else, not particularly well, but with genuine feeling. After dinner, Tyler walked her to her car. He was almost taller than her now, was getting the kind of lean, athletic body that would serve him well in high school. He had plans to run track. He was thinking about studying oceanography or environmental science. He talked about the future with the kind of casual certainty that Karen envied. I wanted to tell you something, Tyler said when they got to her car. Henry's vet said he's completely past the trauma now. She said his behavior has normalized. He doesn't have nightmares anymore and he's not peeing in the house. Mom says he's just normal, like none of it happened. That's good, Karen said. Yeah, it is, but I also wanted to say, Tyler paused, seeming to gather words. I wanted to say thank you, not just for the trainer, but for everything, for choosing to be a different person. That matters. It doesn't undo the bad stuff, but it matters. Karen felt something break open in her chest. The same feeling she got when she helped at the community center, when Sarah showed up with coffee, when she recognized that her life had fundamentally changed because someone had asked for help and she'd chosen to give it. You matter, Karen said to Tyler. Your kindness to me, even when you had every reason not to have it, that matters. You chose to forgive me before I even knew I needed forgiving. That's not small. I'm not forgiving, Tyler said. Not exactly, I'm not interested in staying mad at people. It's too exhausting. And there it was, the thing that Karen had learned but that Tyler had somehow known all along. That holding grudges was harder work than letting them go. That being angry required constant maintenance, while kindness could be offered and then simply released. By May, it was 1 year exactly since Henry had almost drowned in Karen's pool. Sarah suggested they do something to mark the occasion. Not like a sad remembrance, she said when she brought the idea up over coffee. More like a celebration that everyone survived it and became better people. They decided on a pool party. Just neighbors, just the people who'd been impacted by that single moment, Tyler and his friends, some of the community center volunteers, Dr. Okonkwo and her assistant, Gerald Finch from the HOA, who'd been surprisingly kind about the whole situation. Sarah brought food. Tyler's father grilled. Michelle brought a playlist. Henry paddled around the pool like he owned it, completely confident, completely himself. He didn't flinch at splashing or loud noises or any of the things that had once terrified him. He was just a dog again, doing dog things, happy and untraumatized. Karen stood at the edge of the patio and watched everyone use her pool, and she felt something that she couldn't quite name. Not joy exactly, and not pride either. Maybe acceptance, maybe peace. Dr. Okonkwo found her standing there and said, "He's remarkable, isn't he? Most dogs don't recover from that kind of trauma. The dive response is usually fatal. Henry survived because your neighbor had the presence of mind to dive in and break the suction, and because you had the presence of mind to turn off the pump. It was a series of small choices that saved his life." I didn't turn it off until after Tyler got in, Karen said. I probably would have just watched if he hadn't jumped. But you did turn it off, Dr. Okonkwo said. And now you're feeding the neighborhood kids and volunteering at a community center and running a therapy pool for traumatized animals. So even if your impulse in that moment was wrong, you've made a lot of right choices since then. That evening, after everyone had left and the pool was empty and quiet again, Sarah and Karen stood in the driveway making small talk about nothing. About the weather, about Tyler's track season, about Sarah's sister visiting in the summer. I want to say something, Sarah said. And I want you to know that I'm not saying it to make you feel better because you've spent a lot of energy already trying to make yourself feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. Karen waited. I was so angry at you, Sarah continued. After the HOA stuff, after the drainage thing, I was genuinely furious. I thought you were a bully, and I thought my son was developing anxiety about being in his own neighborhood because of how you treated us. But then Henry almost died, and you made a choice. And then you made another choice and another. And I watched my son become someone who could sit with you and not harbor resentment, and I realized that's not because you're a saint now. It's because you made a genuine effort to change. And that matters in ways that I don't think a lot of people understand. Karen wanted to cry, but she was getting better at sitting with emotion without performing it. She just nodded and said, "Thank you for giving me the chance." "Thank you for taking it," Sarah said. By the following winter, nearly 2 years after the incident, Karen had become something of a fixture in the neighborhood. She ran the community center's volunteer program now, had been officially appointed to the board of directors, and had somehow become the person that people called when they needed something organized, arranged, or figured out. She'd started dating someone, a man named Richard who worked in school administration, and who liked that Karen was precise and orderly, but was teaching her that some things didn't need to be controlled, just experienced. She'd gone to Marcus's wedding and smiled for photos, and felt nothing like the desperation or resentment she might have felt 2 years ago. She'd met Jennifer's parents, had coffee with Marcus once a month, had integrated the complication of her ex-husband's new life into her own without it feeling like a failure. She'd also filled the pool in again in her will, directing that whoever bought her house after she died would inherit a functional, maintained pool that was meant to be used. Not kept pristine, not controlled, just used and enjoyed and shared. Tyler was going to be a sophomore now. He decided to run for student council. He was thinking about colleges that had good oceanography programs. He'd gotten his first job at the community center, working with Michelle on the volunteer program that Karen had started. Henry was gray around the muzzle now, was slowing down, but was also living the kind of full, normal dog life that suggested he'd completely overcome whatever trauma had marked him at 3 years old. On a Saturday in August, Karen was at the community center doing her usual end-of-day organizing when Tyler came in. "My mom wanted me to ask you something," he said. "We're thinking about adopting another dog, a rescue that's older, probably has some behavioral issues, and we were wondering if you thought Dr. Okonkwo might be able to help with that too." Karen smiled. "I'll call her." It was such a small thing, such an ordinary request. But a year and a half ago, Tyler would never have asked her anything. He would never have trusted her to call someone. He would never have believed that she was the kind of person who helped with rescued dogs. And a year and a half ago, Karen would never have seen that request as an opportunity to choose kindness. She would have seen it as another imposition, another moment where someone wanted something from her that she didn't want to give. But people change. Not completely and not without ongoing effort, but they do change. Karen had learned that in the most concrete possible way, not through therapy or self-help books or TED Talks, but through the simple fact of being forced to choose, over and over, whether to be the person she'd been or someone different. Every choice had reinforced the next one. Every small kindness had made the next act of kindness easier. Until one day she looked up and realized that the woman who had drained the pool to hurt a child was not the same woman anymore. She wasn't transformed. Transformation implied something dramatic, something complete. But she was changed. She was still changing.